Hello, today we are going to be talking about the shifting of the American Western. The Western was a staple of the American film industry, with the vast majority being made during the studio system before 1960. Many times, if you'd ask a film critic, however, or even the general audience, most Westerns they're aware of were made post 1960. So, why are the more recognizable Westerns created during the second wave? Because of Western fatigue, which ties into genre fatigue, which is the act of when something in a genre has been overproduced due to mass popularity, eventually audiences will grow tired of it due to the formulaic nature of genre. The Western reputation, as defined by James K. Folsom, a film critic at the time, was considered realistically Western movies are silly, and most of the objections to them have more validity than the rather weak and sentimental arguments for them. You can draw modern comparisons to the westerns with what we have with the modern superhero genre, due to this idea that it's just like it's westerns were kind of viewed as the popcorn movie at the time, where there were very little substance, and people were really coming to see recognizable actors, intense action, and beautiful landscapes. So, what brought the western back? Um, the western, despite being a uniquely American genre, was really brought back to due to the revitalized Italian cinema industry. Directors like Sergio Leone created the spaghetti western. It combined the dark realism from Italian cinema with the uniquely American genre. Now, those familiar with Italian cinema recognize that Italians, especially since due to actions of the First and Second World War, a lot of their stories relied on capturing everyday life in perfect replication, and attempted to showcase what living during these rough times was like. So, by breaking the previous mold of this like very watered down and tame Western that was created by America, the Italian Western was able to showcase the real true grit, for lack of a better word, of what was going on at the time. The spaghetti Western, in my eyes, is possibly the best example of cultural appreciation, which that being when another culture takes aspects of a completely different culture, but still gives them the respect that they properly deserve. And I think this is an excellent example of it. The path to the spaghetti western was began during the 20th century, where the Italian literature industry was ripe with stories of American heroes, specifically rodeo stars. There was a lot of these like paperbacks that were sold on the street, and they'd have a lot of stories about people that worked in radio who like rode horses, and it just captured the imagination of the vast popular culture of Italians. But post World War II, Italian art was starting to come back out again because they had gone through a deep depression during the Second World War. And so it started, their own art started to revise again. Simultaneously with that, the American Western began to die out due to an intense fatigue, which was caused by the overproduction of them during the Second World War, before the Second World War, and even after the Second World War. In 1964, Sergio Leone made his own Western film, which he filmed in Spain, starring a relatively unknown Clint Eastwood, called Fistful of Dollars. The film was a complete smash hit in Italy. It captured everything Italians loved about their own cinema, while also combining the action found in American cinema and with landscapes that, while filmed in Spain, appeared uniquely American. Leone went on to film two sequels in the next 2 years, completing the Man with No Name trilogy. These films were For a Few Dollars More and The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. American companies saw these three films and their success in Italy and bought the distribution rights in 1967, and they released the films with A Fistful of Dollars releasing in 1967, A Few Dollars More in 1968, and The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly in 1969. They were all critical and commercial successes, launching Eastwood's career as an American icon and Leone's career as a director here in America. A second wave of westerns had begun that was built on the twisted sense of morality and an unconquered frontier that Leone kind of trademarked during this era. Most of these westerns during this time were very dark, with protagonists that weren't the sheriffs that you found in westerns before. They were outlaws, but they were also hunting outlaws that were even worse than them. So it was this idea that like no one was exactly good in this world, but it was up to the viewer to interpret who was worse. Now, we need to look at John Wayne if we're going to look at how this genre changed. John Wayne was easily the most iconic Western star, at least before 1960. You can argue that whether John Wayne or Clint Eastwood is more influential to the Western genre in America, but before Eastwood's rise, John Wayne was undisputed the face of the American Western. So to see how the Western genre changed, you really need to look at his career around this time period. Pre-1960, John Wayne was kind of known for his one-note performances. Essentially, he was had a reputation for playing the same like rugged cowboy type in every role, someone defined by their own honor. That was until 1969, which, if you know, was post Leone's film release in America. He starred in True Grit as a character named Rooster Cogburn. This role was iconic for him and is perhaps his most well-known individual role because it was essentially a critique of his previous film roles with instead of playing this almost like optimistic while realistic character, Rooster Cogburn was this jaded man who wasn't exactly as willing or cavalier to go around shooting his gun. He was a man defined by his environment, and people found a lot more depth in this performance due to the three-dimensional nature of the character. In 1970, John Wayne won his first Oscar, showing that he was able to get even more critical and commercial recognition when he was willing to deepen his when he was willing to deepen his acting mindscape, I guess you could say. And through this, you're able to recognize that the mainstream Western staples, such as John Wayne, were adopting the darker tone that Italy had proven was popular. Now, we need to look at next the legacy of the American Western, because once the dust settles, we're no longer in 1960. How do we go on from here? Modern Westerns reflect those which came before in terms of theme and stylization. They often become pseudo remakes with imagining early classic Westerns in a more real and gritty style. Unforgiven, a movie which Clint Eastwood won Best Director for, and kind of showcased very early on in his directing career his ability, uh, was an anti hero take on the classic pre 1960 Western known as Shane, which Shane, before this film and before 1960, was kind of known as one of the most famous individual Western characters in the entire genre due to he was quiet, but he had this immeasurable good inside of his heart, which was really what his film was about. But Unforgiven, on the other hand, is you're not meant to like Clint Eastwood's character. It's more about the idea that it's not a sheriff fighting criminals. It's about this outlaw fighting a sheriff, with the sheriff being worse than the outlaw, but both men inarguably having a lot of darkness inside of them. So we can see that Westerns are no longer fetishizing early American nationalism, but now instead often rely heavily on character pieces of people who are misguided and broken by their environment. Unforgiven is a redemption story for Clint Eastwood's character because it is about this whole idea where it kind of looks at the villains of past westerns and asks if they're able to redeem themselves while still analyzing their environment. So what does this mean in general? Genre fatigue is both real and exciting. Eventually, every popular genre will fade in waves, but they're going to become revitalized by breaking the faults of the previous wave. Leone and the rest of the spaghetti western movement are evidence of that. So next time, if there's like a decade-long period where you're feeling that Hollywood is churning out the same movies over and over again, it's a very exciting moment, you should realize, because you should be able to see that everything is going to restart in a better and mold breaking way. And here are my works cited. All right. Thank you very much for your time. Hope this proved informative.